Welcome back to the new adventures of the monad. Today we start our adventure by looking at the 6th round of the moon chain. To date, we have looked at how the mammalian monads in the previous 5 rounds began to causalize. Some groups of animals did it the right way, others the wrong way. Let's continue now and look at the 6th round. The problem is that no information has been published about what happened in globes A, B and C. We shall therefore commence our discussions with our study on globe D, the moon itself. When you consider the vast history of any globe, we have to focus somewhere. So let us stick with the groups we discussed previously. These young souls individualized in the 5th round of globe D. They were born in the 6th round as humans of a simple and primitive type, though not savage or brutal, as Ledbetter described their appearance as being ragged with thick lips, noses squat and wide at the base. We are told they lived on an island. They do not fight among themselves except when food runs short, but there was fighting against invaders from the mainland, who were particularly brutal. Ledbetter tells us these invaders were cannibals, fiendishly cruel and dreaded by the inhabitants of the island. The islanders themselves killed whoever they took prisoner, but did not, like the mainland invaders, either torture them living or eat them dead. The aggressive humans from the mainland were from those monads who had individualized by fear in the 5th round. The life of the islanders was communal, and they lived promiscuously. The intervals between death and rebirth were very short, a few years at most. One reason for this is that they did not have much of a mental body to dwell in and process what they had just experienced. So they went into the emotional world and reincarnated quickly. When they did, they were reborn into the same community. These monads were assisted to a limited degree by more advanced monads, which quickened their evolution. The future Master Moya came to the islanders and taught them the use of fire and cultivation of the soil. Later, the Master Kuthumi also joined the party, and under his influence the people became marginally more civilized. The Master Moya later returned to his own country and city. This was a civilized habitat by comparison, with large attractive buildings and many shops. Animals were used for both draft and for riding. Commerce was carried out with other cities, and canals connected the cities with each other over great distances. One thing of interest was that the most evolved monads in this community had a blue complexion. The ruling council of this city was in touch with a group of people living secluded lives in an inaccessible region. Where have we seen this before? These people, some of whom will be known later as the Lords of the Moon when they reached the stage of Arhat 46 selves, were themselves pupils of still more exalted beings who had come to this globe from another sphere and were even further up the evolutionary ladder. From these high adepts came an instruction to the elders of the city to exterminate the savages of the mainland coasts. This was duly effected. The islanders previously mentioned were then transferred from their island to the mainland and incorporated as a colony of this more advanced empire. Cruel as this may seem, it was part of the operation of the Day of Judgment of the moon chain, when those who were incapable of further progress on that chain were eliminated from it. Under this category came those savage monads who had bodies that were suitable for their low stage of evolution, but would no longer be available to incarnate into. As they died, they passed into a condition of interchain sleep. Many bodies of similarly low development were destroyed by seismic catastrophes, which laid whole districts waste, and the population of the globe was consequently drastically reduced. From this time forward, All energies were directed towards rapidly pressing forward the evolution of those monads who remained, preparing them for life on the earth chain. The whole tribe, partially civilized by Kuthumi, our very own Pythagoras, managed to escape the dropping out process. The orange group, who individualized in the fifth round by vanity, were mostly born into city populations drifting together by similarity of tastes and contempt for others, though their vanity led to a great deal of quarreling amongst themselves. The separateness of their nature became intensified, and their mental body strengthened in an undesirable way, becoming more and more of a shell, shutting out others. As they repressed animal passions, the emotional body grew less powerful, animal passions being starved out by a hard and cold asceticism instead of being transmuted into human emotions. Sex and passion, for example, were suppressed instead of being changed into love. Hence, in life after life, they had less feeling and physically tended towards asexuality, while they developed individualism to a high point. This very development led to the constant quarreling and rioting. They formed communities, but these broke up again because no one would obey. Each wanted to rule. Any attempt by more highly developed people to help or guide them led to an outburst of jealousy or resentment, it being construed as a plan to manage or belittle them. Pride grew stronger and they became cold and calculating, without pity and remorse. On globe E, the emotional globe, they remained active, but only for a short time, the emotional body being dwarfed until it became atrophied. On globe F, the mental globe, the mental body became hardened and lost plasticity, leading to a curious truncated effect, which was not attractive to look at. To view them, you would see someone who had lost their legs from the knees downward and had their trousers sewn up over the stumps. The yellow group individualized in the fifth round by admiration. They were docile and teachable and also tended to incarnate mostly into city populations. They formed what Leadbetter called a better class of laborers, rising through the lower middle classes to the upper and developing intelligence to a very considerable extent. They were free from excessive pride, so that their auras, as mentioned previously, were not orange, but clear, bright, and rather golden yellow. Whilst not devoid of emotions, their feelings led them to cooperate and be obedient to those wiser than themselves, being selfish rather than loving. Their intelligence introduced them to cooperate for their own advantage rather than to spread happiness amongst others. Hence their orderliness and discipline quickened their evolution. But as we saw before, they gave the impression of having developed in their mental bodies the qualities that should have had their root in their emotional bodies, founded in and nourished by love instead of by self-interest. Hence, their emotional bodies were insufficiently developed. This led to them not being able to profit from their sojourn on globe E, the emotional globe, but considerably improve their mental bodies on globe F, the mental globe. Are you beginning to see a pattern here? Although it is globe D where the main action happens in the evolution of a monad, what has been achieved here is consolidated in a later globe, which are always on a higher plane and so are in the realm of the higher envelopes of the monad. Globes E, F, and G were most useful to the groups of monads who had individualized in one of the three right ways and consequently were developing in a balanced rather than a lopsided fashion. Unlike those monads who had individualized through one of the wrong ways, so far as intelligence was concerned, those monads would be compelled later on to develop the emotions they had in the earlier days either stunted or neglected. In the long run, we have to completely develop all of our talents, and this is done through balancing our envelopes from etheric to causal. Over the huge sweep of evolution from nascence to omniscience, the progress or the methods at any particular stage lose their importance, which they once may have appeared to have, based on our ignorance at the time. In globes E, F, and G, in the 6th round, came successively into activity great emotional and mental progress, which was made by more advanced monads. The Day of Judgment, having eliminated from the chain the backward monads, there were no hopeless laggards to be a drag on evolution, and growth was steady and more rapid than before. Much of the vegetation in the 6th round belonged to what we would now call the fungus family, but was gigantic and monstrous. Some trees grew to a great height in a single year, and some were semi-animal. Branches, when cut off, writhed like snakes and coiled around the humans who had been using the axe, constricting them until they died. Red sap like blood gushed out as the result of a stroke of an axe. The texture of the tree was fleshy. The tree itself was carnivorous, seizing any animal that touched it, coiling its branches around it like an octopus, embracing and sucking it dry. Only very strong and skillful men were entrusted with the task of harvesting such a dangerous crop. When the branches had died, the rind was stripped off and made into a kind of leather, the flesh being cooked and eaten. What is wrong with just ordering a pizza from your local takeaway? Many of the growths we call plants were semi-animal and semi-vegetable. One had a large umbrella-like top with a slice in the middle which allowed the two halves armed with teeth to open out. It bent over with giant jaws and seized any animal that brushed against it, snapping its jaws over it. Then the stem straightened itself and the closed halves opened to form an umbrella-like surface once again, while the animal was sucked dry. The men cut the tree down while the jaws were closed. This was done by a person leaping out of the reach as the top swooped down to seize the aggressor. Our Venus flytrap seems to be very timid by comparison, except for the flies that fall into its embrace. Insect life was abundant and gigantic, and served largely as food for the carnivorous trees. Some insects were 2 feet long, aggressive, and were best avoided by the human inhabitants. The houses were built as quadrangles, enclosing very large courtyards. These were covered with a strong netting in the season when the large insects were numerous. The children were not allowed to go outside these enclosures. The year was roughly about the same length as our own. The relation of the globe to the sun was similar, but was different as regards to the constellations. When the 6th round was completed, preparations began to be made for the exceptional conditions of the 7th and final round, during which all the inhabitants and much of the substance of the moon chain were to be transferred to the succeeding chain, that of the Earth. That exciting tale will be the subject of the next presentation. Thank you.